Last time I was lucky enough to get the chance to shape some plates of steel to make a medieval arm harness, or part of one. These plates form the lower part of the arm. The shape's good, but the finish is very, very rough. There's a lot of work to go into it until it gets to this. This is a similar piece of armour, but it's in a finished state. It has the rolled edges, it has the hinges and the strapping, and it's ready to go on somebody's arm. But this is one small piece of medieval harness. How do all the pieces interact and go together to create a practical defensive structure around the medieval soldier? I'm going to start with, I've got my medieval underwear on, so I've got my hose and I've got my arming jacket. This arming jacket is made to fit me. It is filthy because I sweat in it, pick up all the muck and horse sweat from the armour and from the environment. And if I wash it, it changes shape, so it's not been washed, ever. This is a coif. My hair's quite long and it will catch in bits of the helmet, so there you go, you put on the coif. This acts as a barrier between the helmet liner and my head. It's not really protective as much as keeps my hair out of the way. And it's a particularly medieval look. Coifs start to go out of fashion for civilian wear, but I think it's quite likely they were maintained as sort of head underwear in this period. So I start arming up from the feet upwards. The first few bits I can do myself and are the lightest but most sophisticated and complex bit of the armour. The shape of greaves is quite complex. It's got to fit, especially these enclosed greaves, it's got to fit around the muscles of the leg. And as anybody that's been kicked in the shins or plays sport will understand, if you get hit on the shin, it's incredibly painful. So these go on in a particular way. They are asymmetrical. I've been quite careful to make sure my hose is not caught in the greaves, because comfort with any sports equipment, with any equipment you are going to be using in an extreme situation, you want it to be as comfortable as possible. Greaves have a peg at the front, which I will show you what it does, and a loop at the back. So they're not particularly tight, they float quite nicely, and they're not particularly heavy. The originals in museums are not particularly thick metal, but it will add a layer of protection. This is CUISSE. A lot of the words that describe harness in English are French words that have been changed and adopted by the English and mispronounced as far as the French are concerned. So CUISSE means thigh. It's a thigh plate. It has what's called a stop rib. This is an interesting one because it shows you an example of a stop rib doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Nobody was really sure. They were called stop ribs because the idea is that a blow might slide up, and then if it goes further up, it'll get into your groin, which is a bad thing. People thought this might be to do with that, and it is. This is a blow from a lance. Good friend of mine, Philippe, hit me a bit low. The lance broke. I hit him quite high. He came off the saddle and he did this damage to my armour. So the stop rib did exactly what it's supposed to do. It stopped the lance sliding up into my groin. So I'm quite pleased. I could have had that hammered out, but I quite like telling people about it. And armour encases and encapsulates a story. So for me, it's important to keep that, even though it's obviously a dent. It reminds me of a particular situation where I used the harness. You can see the leg harness has gone, the upper leg harness has gone over that peg, so that keeps those two linked together, and then it will go through the loop at the back. Get it right. So now the cuisse and the greave are connected together by that strap. The cuisse itself is held up by this point. Now this is where you start to feel the weight of the armour coming onto your body, because the weight of all my leg armour is now coming through my arming jacket, through this point that is made of the same material that bowstrings are made of. That's what it says in the old books. And it's covered with beeswax, so it's slightly tacky. So when you make a knot, the knot holds itself together. That's very important. If that gets cut, my leg harness will drop, and that could lock the knee, which would reduce my mobility. You see, the cuisse goes part round the leg, not all the way around the leg, because for this particular harness, this is designed for riding as much as it is for foot combat. So on the inside, there's going to be a horse. On the outside, this needs to wrap round, but not go too far, because I don't want this bit rubbing on the saddle or interfering with how I use my leg on the horse. So there's one bit. It's the next bit going on. Harness that's high status, harness for a wealthy man, is made to measure. You can get munitions armour in the medieval period, cheaper quality, just as protective in arguably, not made to measure, and probably a bit less sophisticated. It probably wouldn't have had the gilding on it, because munitions armour was supplied to the rest of the men that were fighting with you as a knight. So you would perhaps supply them with a breastplate. Probably wouldn't bother with leg armour. It depends on how wealthy you were as a knight or a lord. And status is a very important component of armour. Armour protects you physically on the battlefield. It also makes you a bit of a target. If you've got fancy armour on, people know that you are wealthy and might want to kill you, potentially, or more likely in the medieval period, they might want to capture you. This harness is going to become different on the right and the left, but at the moment, it's pretty much the same. I'm going to put my mail skirt on now. Male as in the material, not male as in masculine. This is designed to protect several areas. The obvious area of my body it protects is my groin, but it also protects the armour itself, because, as I said before, if you cut to this, if this comes off, the leg harness can slip down and lock your knees. So the mail also protects the points and the attachments of the armour. You can see how the layers are effectively protecting each other, a little bit like the tiles of a roof, but they protect each other. So this got to go more or less evenly. It needs a bit of repair. Armour is not fixed in place. This is torn since the last time I used it. So I will need to get my squire, me, to actually attach that again. But for the moment, it'll do its job. So up to now, I've been able to arm myself. And if I was of high status back in the time, I probably wouldn't have armed myself. To be honest, I'd have probably stood there and been armed. But I quite like doing this. It's sort of quite nice to do. Now I need a squire to start to help me. The armour starts to get difficult to put on yourself, and I will bring in my lovely assistant. So we're going to put on the breastplate first. A lot of people think breastplate covers your belly as well. It doesn't. It just covers your chest and your ribs. So this is the back. It's got lovely shapes on it, but it's also meant to protect your spine, and the front is a bit plainer. So if I was a proper medieval knight, I'd probably be drinking a glass of wine about now and just basically standing here and being armed. But I'm actually going to get a little bit involved because I'm not a medieval knight. So this is adjusted over the shoulders. Normally I'd be wearing mail underneath this as well. Mail voiders, but I've taken those off for repair at the moment. And you'll see how the points are being organised so that we can do the next thing afterwards. Because armour will layer up. Fantastic. So This is the breastplate. It effectively just covers my rib cage. It allows me lots of flexibility, but it protects the upper body. And I'm going to make sure everything's in the right place. And then we will go for the plackart. The plackart protects the lower body, groin, and is a bigger piece of armour, but interacts with this top piece to be flexible. I think you need to be on the other side, isn't it? No. You have to be a bit careful of fingers because armour's edges, whilst they're not deliberately sharp, they are just raw edges of metal that's been finished and polished over, but they can cut and catch your fingers. I have no idea whether this rope thing we're going to do is authentic or not, but what it enables us to do is squeeze the armour closed, and it makes attaching the buckles much easier. And then when I take the pressure off this rope, the armour then sits into itself and tightens up the buckles, and it seems to work for us, so chances are this was done. Somebody jokingly referred to this rope as a pie rope because you need more rope if you've eaten more pies. That's a modern joke, it's nothing to do with medieval things, but right. Now, you can see how suddenly it looks like I've got a lot more armour on. I've got my plackart breastplate. These are tassets. These are designed, again, to protect the thigh, to protect the part of you that is likely to get hit. So if I'm on a horse and I didn't have these, the armour, theoretically you could go up underneath very easily. This and this plate act as an extra protection. Yes, you could get something underneath it, but if something hits there, you've got this, then you've got my MAILLE, and both work quite well. These tassets can be set in different ways. You can see they're adjustable. You could, if I was fighting on foot, I could adjust them to be vertical like this. These are actually set for use on horse, so they're slightly wide. So they look a little odd now, but when I'm on a horse, they actually work. And that's what the position I'd be in on horse, so they would align with my legs. So a little tiny detail that you could tell whether somebody's intending to ride a horse or not when they're in this kind of armour, theoretically by the way their tassets are set. So we're pretty much done with the symmetrical part of the armour. So now I'm going to start putting on my arms. The arms are multiple pieces, but they're all attached. So they're linked together by strips of leather that's riveted, and then they're just attached at the top here with one point. And so this is the lower cannon of my VAMBRACE. VAMBRACE is this arm harness completely. You can see it protects some of my arm, but again, not all of it. There's a gap here which would be filled with MAILLE, and it is a bit shorter than most people think it should be. It's not like a pair of sleeves. It's actually quite short because it's got to free up these bits of the wrist. You need to be able to move your wrist, so it sort of sits a bit further back than you would think. And then we've got a massive plate which protects the crook of the arm. I'm mostly, with this harness, going to be this arm in this position because I'm going to be holding the reins and guiding the horse, and this is my arm that's going to do a lot of action. This just protects the inner part of my arm. It's curved all the way around and effectively shuts all the gaps. If you get hit on the inside of your arm, you've got lots of blood vessels and tendons and things, and that's very vulnerable. The inside of any curve of your body is vulnerable. This helps protect it. It's actually got two layers. You can't see it from now, but there's a smaller piece and a grand piece over the top. Right, let's do the next bit. This is my right arm, obviously, and you can start to see there's difference from one side to the other. The elbow piece on this side, the cutter, is a different shape, and I'll explain why in a moment. Let's get this attached. So you can see this is much bigger than this. That's because both sides of my body are going to be doing different things. This is going to be holding the reins, and this is going to be holding the weapon, or in many cases the lance. This came all the way over like this, the lance would catch on it. So it's specifically designed to give you as much protection as it can whilst you're holding a lance. And it'll be the same with the next piece of armour up on my shoulder. So we are starting to getting into armour that's asymmetrical, because I'm expecting a threat mostly from my left hand side, and I'm going to give the threat with my right hand side. So let's have a look at the pauldrons. So this is where I try and keep my hair out of the way. This is a pauldron. It's a very big piece of armour. It covers parts of my chest all the way around my shoulder, down my arm a little bit, and onto my back. And it's got 2 layers as well. So when it's attached, I will show you, it protects my heart quite well. This particular position I'm standing in now is seen in illustrations. There's a famous illustration called How a Man Shall Be Armed from the 15th century, and a knight with his arm on the shoulder of his squire, or the squire doing all the bits and pieces up, is actually characteristic, and it works. So you can see the armour works in tandem with itself. So I've got elbow protection, I've got shoulder protection, 2 layers of armour on this, and when I'm riding it protects quite a big part of my, not quite my heart's here, but it protects a big part of the side of my body. That's the side likely to get hit by somebody lancing at me, especially in the joust. Right. This pauldron is cut away, and again you could probably see why. It's so that I can hold a lance. So arguably I'm less protected on my right hand side than on my left hand side, although the lance will act as a protection because it blocks the space. Okay. So you can see reins in this hand, holding like this, lance in this hand. Lance would go under here, under my armpit, to allow me to couch it. This is where you would attach a lance rest. So if you were doing a joust of war, or you were wanting to kill somebody with a lance, you have a hook attached to here, and this hook comes out here. You put the lance on top of it, and you have what's called a grapper, and the grapper, effectively when the lance is pushed back by impact, the grapper grips onto the lance rest, and it will put all the impact of my body through the tip of the lance. I'm missing gloves, and a gauntlet, and a helmet, so we'll try putting on throat and face protection and the open face helmet. So this is a piece of armour often not seen in television and movies. So this is a piece of armour often not seen in movies and television, for the obvious reason that it protects your face and your throat. It makes conversation difficult, and if you use it properly, it hides half of your face. So we're going to see what the sound is like, but you can understand why if you're paying an actor a lot of money, then you don't want this up because you want to see their face. But this is essential in combat because your face and your throat are the most vulnerable things on your body, or amongst the most vulnerable things on your body. So put the helmet on, the open face helmet, please. Now, push it down. Thank you. In. Now, a helmet is essential Even the lowliest soldiers, I would imagine, would have wanted a helmet first. It's the first piece of armour. Maybe gloves and some protection for the hands, but helmet first. You get hit in the head, you're done for. This is a sallet, but it doesn't have a visor on it. This is exactly the same helmet, but it's got the face protection. Now, we see in the illustrations that we've got of the period that some people rode around with helmets with visors, like this, and some without. Typically, a lot of the English cavalry didn't have visors. Now, we don't really know the reason for that. One of my ideas is that there was less threat from missile weapons from the enemies of the English than there was threat from longbows from the English. So the enemies of the English had to wear visors, otherwise they'd get shot in the face. But the English knights themselves perhaps decided not to take the risk to have greater vision. What I know for a fact is that if you've got your visor down, you can't see very well and you can't hear very well, and so you're vulnerable because you can't see threats. If you can have your visor open like this, or just don't have a visor, you are actually quite able to see around and monitor the battlefield and take advantage. So I guess this would have been a personal choice. I quite like in my battle reenactments to have no visor, probably because I'm not actually going to be attacked and therefore I can see well. But if I was going into the joust, obviously I would wear probably a helmet different from this, but I would at least wear a visor to protect my face. I really like wearing medieval armour because it's a form of time travel. It allows you to imagine what it was like back a few hundred years when people were wearing it for real. If it's authentic armour, which mine is, 15th century, it's exactly the same kind of stuff that they would have been wearing. So your experiences when wearing it are the same as their experiences. Your mind might be in a different place, and I've never actually been preparing for battle, but the armour takes 25-30 minutes to put on properly, and the average knight would have had quite a large retinue of people to help him put the armour on. And the armour has to go on properly as well. If the armour doesn't feel right or something's uncomfortable underneath it, you will be distracted in the battle, and that distraction could cause your death. Or, more likely, it could cause injury, because if it rubs in the wrong place and rubs you raw, you might get an infection from the battlefield. And we all know that medieval battlefields were quite filthy, horrible places. So even a minor injury could have actually caused infection, and without antibiotics and proper modern treatment, an infection can kill you. So you would be very sensible to put your armour on carefully and properly before you went into fight with it. Please like and subscribe, and don't forget to use that notification button if you can, and we'll see you next time.